English translation, 238th Contact, Part 1, Saturday, 18th of May, 1991. Show up 1:55 hours.
I am very pleased to be allowed to welcome you again after more than a year, my friend. I thought that you would appear again, at the latest, at the end of April, once you were back from visiting Simyase in the Dal universe. But be greeted and cordially welcomed, Salome.
Your greeting is returned to you in the same manner, whereby I am also to greet you very dearly for my daughter Simyase and for her friend Nera. In addition, the many greetings from all others should not be forgotten. So also not those of Quetzal, who has passed all of his tests with bravado and now bears the title of Njeshvish, about which he is extremely pleased and cannot conceal a certain pride. On occasion he will visit you, but first once he has dealt with the important issues that are yet to be incurred. Even for me, it will still take a little time before my next appearance again, because not until the second half of the year will an opportunity for this be offered to me again. But the fact that I appear so belatedly with you now, after my one-year visit with my daughter Simyase in the Dal universe, this has a specific reason. I was already back on the 3rd of February and moreover in your workroom, which has advantageously changed a lot again during my absence. Actually, I was just about to call you when I saw the pages of the Talmud Emmanuel book on your desk and was astonished to find out that you corrected the entire script. This compelled me to investigate the matter more closely. A not mild shock seized me when I looked through the printed copy that's been in circulation for many years, which we do not have in our possession for reasons that are well known to you, for it is not relevant for us in reference to the teaching. But still, we are well aware of the exact contents, and these were not identical to my browsing of the script. So I quickly went back into my flying apparatus and ordered the control element of the control disk to turn on, which I then promptly examined. I noticed that at that time, in the 70s, you coded everything correctly, in accordance with the translations of Isa Rashid, but then, due to lack of time, you sent the pure copy of the manuscript to a female person by the name of Crower, and then paid 1,460 francs for it. But then, this person mutilated and falsified the Talmud Emmanuel and your code to such an extent that the Talmud became as good as worthless for the mission and for the determinations and for the code-affected persons. And since you could not spare any more time at that time, in order to look through and correct the copy again, the falsified Talmud Emmanuel was then accordingly printed with all changes, omissions, and falsifications, without you knowing anything about the destruction of the code and of the contents of the writing. Only through the fact that the Talmud Emmanuel was sent to you by an American publishing company for inspection and correction, because it wanted to publish the work, did you then discover the evil machinations of the copyist. I, however, was interested in the reason behind this act, so I endeavored to get an exact clarification, whereby I came across some things and connections that have surprised me, just as they will surely also do so with you. Until yesterday, I strove for a clarification of the things surrounding the falsification of the Talmud Emmanuel and surrounding the destruction of your code, and what resulted was really astonishing. The person Crower is not just an uncommon Israel-related sympathizer, but also a follower of Zionism, for whom every means is right which can contribute to the achieving of world domination by the Zionists. However, this whole situation with her did not just happen out of nowhere because it is based on a very specific background, which surprised me greatly. My remaining investigations revealed that the person Crower also lived during Emmanuel's lifetime and came into direct contact with Emmanuel. But at that time her gender was not female as it is now, but rather male, and at that time her current spirit form animated the Pharisee Simeon, the father of the traitor Judah Ihariot.
That is indeed something. But you tell me nothing new, for in the meantime, I have already discovered all this myself, as some group members can attest to this, to whom I told my thoughts. Through your investigations, however, everything is now confirmed.
And here I actually thought that I could tell you news that would be astonishing for you. But for a long time, it has no longer been new to me that you are always somewhat ahead of us. I also only know this, however, because I know about your true origin and about your true original person. During all the years of our contacts, you have very often put us to the test, when you approached us with questions that you could answer better than we can do in our present lives. Through this, you gave us the impression that you would have to be taught by us. With regard to the spiritual teaching and the creational teaching, etc., even though in truth just the opposite is true, as we now know. This approach of yours seems to be a special type of human testing, which you also bring to use very frequently with the Earth humans. Concerning this, I would just once like to address your language cognizance or your skilled labor and knowledge-related cognizance, which you always or very often conceal, by presenting yourself as ignorant or without understanding. But we now know that the exact opposite is the case, just as well as also various group members know this. As is so nicely said, you very often hide your light under the bushel, present yourself as naive and uncultured, a hillbilly and insignificant, even though there can be no talk in relation to this at all. But through this, that you present yourself in such a manner, you find out a lot more things than what one actually wants to tell you. And above all, through your relevant style, you can examine and analyze human beings down to the last detail in such a manner that almost nothing remains hidden to you. Sometimes, it is even amusing to observe you and those who come before you with lies, and who are of the acceptance that you would not recognize and would not understand their webs of lies and other untruths. Anyway, it did not escape me on several occasions that you simply allowed yourself to be lied to, without you having kept yourself from it, even though you knew very well that one was lying to you, but it would actually be extremely difficult to be able to lie to you at all. Your face, however, and this is certain, never betrays that you recognize the lie. Quite the contrary, you can still conjure up an expression on your face, as though you would accept the lie, whereby you still often amuse yourself, while the liars stand there stupidly and are of the crazy belief that you would take their falsehoods at face value. I already became aware of these facts at the beginning of our contacts, but still, you could so distract all of us from the reality and truth of your person and origin, etc., with your so innocent and seemingly ignorant questions, that we let ourselves be deceived only too quickly.
You reveal secrets again that you should actually conceal. It would be pleasant if you could explain to me, actually, why Taljda no longer has returned after our last contact of the 9th of November, 1990. In fact, she really wanted to come here again after a short time, but she did not come.
She is very sensitive. Her task at the time was to observe the events in the Gulf and especially in Kuwait. But when doing this, she also experienced the inhumane atrocities of the Iraqi soldiers against the Kuwait population in such a manner that she suffered a severe shock, from which she has up to the present still not completely recovered.
I thought this myself. However, how is she now?
Her condition is still not such that she can return to her tasks again. It will probably still take a few months before she is healthy again.
Really tender, the child. However, how is Simya Se and all of the others, and how was your one-year holiday in the Dal universe?
My daughter is completely healthy again, but nevertheless, She will further remain for the next 6 decades in the Dial universe, and she will newly learn all of her knowledge and abilities, where her friend Asket is very helpful to her. All of the others who you address with your question, they all are happily without any matters by which they could be burdened. Regarding my person and my holiday, this is not entirely such as you assume. On my part, I had quite a great deal to do in the Dal universe, whereupon my holiday days were really limited. Also, we occupied ourselves over there in the sister universe with terrestrial interests, like, for example, further investigations regarding the AIDS immunity weakening sickness, which brought some new discoveries to us which we have immediately sent in impulse form to terrestrial researchers who occupy themselves with these same interests, so that they can gain new discoveries. We will do the same when we are able to find the effective active agents against this evil scourge.
Do you mean by this that you will transmit your discoveries and research results, etc., in an impulse-based form to terrestrial scientists when you gain new discoveries and achieve new results?
That is the meaning of my words, yes.
Of course, however, it will certainly be done so in regard to the impulse transmissions. That the concerning scientists will not notice this, and the assumption will be that they have reached and worked out the results themselves.
Certainly, that is the usual way.
Good, so far this is clear. However, now tell me what you have gained as new discoveries and have transmitted to Earth scientists.
You of course know that Quetzal is the first one among us who has occupied himself with the AIDS epidemic and found out that the transference occurrence of this sickness from human to human is passed on in the same wise as is the case with syphilis, and that is through sexual contact.
Yes, I remember what he said regarding this. It is a matter of a virus sickness, when pathogens live in the blood as parasites and destroy the immune system. However, I still remember also that Quetzal explained at the time that the AIDS sickness spreads not only through direct sexual contact or through direct blood transference and spreads out in an epidemic-like manner, but also through kisses, because the pathogen is found in blood saliva and in bleeding mucous membranes. However, up to today, this is denied by our extra-clever Earth scientists.
Actually, I wanted to speak about these facts because they do not allow us to find peace. For this reason, we very intensively occupy ourselves with them until we can prove through our research that the epidemic actually can be transmitted through bloody kisses, as already explained by Quetzal at the time, and we transmitted the impulses of our discoveries to important researchers on the Earth who occupied themselves with this problem. After which these then undertook the corresponding attempts and arrived to the predetermined results, which probably in the month of June of this year also will become known to the wider public.
Then indeed it continues again a step further. But I am not able to neglect to thank you for all of your endeavors and discoveries which you have transmitted through impulses to our scientists. If I may be so megalomaniacal, then I would like to thank you in the name of all terrestrial humanity, because your discoveries will certainly produce something for the better, and also help for a better protection against the sickness and to control it. If the Earth Twits are only great enough to accept these discoveries, and to work out the results from them.
Our action is our duty.
Very well. But tell me, whether you could deal with the future events on Earth during your long absence, and whether you are able to provide me with some information about them now. I am also looking forward to your reply on China, of which, in passing, you have explained quite a few things to me about what is happening in relation to the death penalty and organ transplants. Have you reached definitive clarity about that?
Of course, this clarity is given, but it is not based on my own clarifications, nor on the concerns about future events on Earth. In this regard, there were other personnel at work who were concerned about these things, which does not mean, however, that I could not give you information because of this. So here then, the events surrounding organ transplants from person to person in China are actually based on the information I gave you more than a year ago. In China, organ recipients are beneficiaries of death row inmates who are executed. Human beings are sentenced to death and executed for trifles, such as stealing a bicycle and the like, as well as for serious crimes. The judges and jurors who pass sentence are so corrupt and criminal that they only sentence human beings to death and execution in order to obtain free and healthy donor organs. The matter occurs in such a manner that the court and judgment rulers receive information from doctors and hospitals about which human organs are needed for a transplant, according to which the court rulers and judges condemn human beings to death and execution in order to obtain their required organs. As a result, the judges and the like, of the Chinese type, can also predict the time of transplantation, which will be communicated to the organ recipients by the doctors, whereby this time is of course always the time of the execution of the person sentenced to death, of course at an exactly predetermined time.
Then word for word, the truth is what you told me back then.
That is so.
Then the criminal judges and other court henchmen in China actually sell organs of living human beings, who then sentence them to death and execute them at the appropriate time.
This is the fact. However, not only the judges and other court rulers do the big business with it, but also the policemen and prison wardens, but also the executioners who execute the sentence to death in such a manner that the organs needed and sold are not injured. It must also be said that the executed are robbed of all useful organs and thus serve practically as a human spare parts store.
A few years ago, I wrote a letter in disguise to the Chinese embassy and the Chinese government, denouncing the messes and inhumanities that exist in China with regard to the death penalty. However, I have not received an answer to this question to date, probably because the pig guys at the helm do not consider it necessary.
I know this, but to my knowledge, you did not expect that you would receive an answer to your accusations from this inhuman group of criminals. But now listen further, for I would like to explain to you something more about the future of the Earth, or what will happen on the Earth. So it follows already next Monday, May 21st, that an old friend of yours will be murdered by a bomb attack.
You make me happy again, and as usual you cannot do anything about it. But who will it be this time?
You also knew his mother and her father, so Indira Gandhi and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, for whom you worked in India in a difficult and dangerous mission, as well as for the then President Dr. Radhakrishnan.
Oh, you are talking about Rajiv. Of course I know him, but I do not want to call him a friend, because rather he was only a good acquaintance of mine. And this only because I came into contact with him through Indira, his mother, who meant a lot to me, as you know, as well as her father Pandit, who was really a good friend to me. So Rajiv is murdered. I am very sorry about that. But who is to blame?
The bomb will be a body bomb laced around a woman's body and exploded by her at the appropriate moment. With many pieces of metal, it is then a fragmentation bomb, which not only tears the murderess apart beyond recognition, but also kills Rajiv Gandhi and some bystanders.
As usual, nothing more than primitive murderous machinations that testify to the incredibly low and dirty value of those who work out and order such murderous actions or carry them out. Dirtiest human scum.
Your words correspond exactly to what we think about them. But now listen further to what I have to report. Regarding my explanation of the immunodeficiency disease AIDS, it is still necessary to point out that also a few animal species can be affected by this epidemic and are able to transfer these to humans. Some of this fact has already been impulsively passed on by us to leading earthly scientists, through which they will come to known knowledge. Unfortunately, however, The Earth scientists are still often so narrow-minded that they simply do not want to admit the real facts. So they also continue to deny the fact of the transmission of the AIDS pestilence from animals to humans. Although it has long been known that the pestilence was taken up and spread by sodomistic machinations of degenerate earthlings, especially by those degenerate ones who indulge homosexual inclinations paired with sodomy. So there are now 3 wild animal species that carry the AIDS viruses, and through which humans can be infected, even if the species of the epidemic differ among the 3 different animal species. However, I will not talk about this further, because the danger of an infection of humans by these animals is extremely low, if perhaps the chimpanzee is ignored, which is unfortunately often also kept as a domestic animal. Great danger, however, is imminent to humans because of the cats, whereby especially the domestic cats cause a lot of annoyance in this respect because they are in close contact with humans. Many of these animals are carriers of the AIDS virus, which can become dangerous for humans and which transmit the disease to them, even if cat AIDS is a different species. Namely, the 3 different ones, which, however, trigger the known AIDS disease in humans by transmission, which has become characteristic of humans and is constantly changing into new forms. The earthly scientists, however, did not and do not want to acknowledge these facts in their inappropriate and insane arrogance and megalomania, and consequently do not make public any corresponding warnings. But just such a warning would be of urgent necessity, because the unbelievable unreasonableness of the Earth humans to keep domestic animals in their human dwellings has degenerated to such an extent that it mocks all well-meaning advice and all clear reason.
I have already written about it, as in the directives, for example.
I know that, but keep listening now. If last year was a catastrophic year in terms of many earthquakes, this will not change this year either, because severe earthquakes will continue to shake the earth, claim many lives, and cause immense damage. Also, volcanoes will bring great dangers and damage through enormous eruptions, claim human lives, and cause many earthquakes. A fact which will be denied, however, by the appropriate responsible scientists, as has happened since time immemorial. The fact will nevertheless be that many earthquakes are caused by the volcanic activity of various volcanoes. For example, on the 3rd of June, the volcano Unzendak in Japan, and on June 9th, the Pinatubo in the Philippines will erupt and cause immense damage in addition to claiming many human lives. These 2 eruptions, which will cause big catastrophes, will only be the beginning of what will happen in the course of the coming time and years in this regard in worldwide form, when since primeval times dormant volcanoes begin to erupt again, like for example the Pinatubo, which rested about 600 years. But also new volcanoes will emerge and cause a lot of damage and disaster, and also by these then enormous earthquakes will be released. Very clever scientists will claim, for example, that the eruptions and earthquakes of the volcanoes Pinatubo and Unzendake have a direct or indirect connection with the increased solar activities, or even with a rare constellation of stars in which 3 Sol stars are divided into a line, which should lead to strong gravitational forces hitting the Earth and influencing the volcanoes and the Earth to such an extent that earthquakes and volcanic eruptions would occur. The imminent volcanic eruptions of the Unzendake in Japan and the Pinatubo in the Philippines and the resulting earthquakes will be a direct consequence of the criminal underground and submarine nuclear bomb tests in the Mururoa Atoll, as well as in Russia and America. An extremely strong relation of these atomic bomb tests results thereby with the Pinatubo on the Philippines, aligned to the criminal atomic tests of the French in the Mururoa Atoll. However, these events will not be the only ones to be triggered by the guilt of the Earth humans, because the criminal oil fires in Kuwait caused by Saddam Hussein will cause catastrophic climate changes, as will the volcanic eruptions. This will cause climatic changes and abnormal weather conditions that will inflict wounds, damage, and cause unspeakable suffering throughout the world. China will be the first to be struck by true deluges. Wild waters will wave and flood much land, claim human lives, and cause damage, while in Russia's vast regions a dryness will appear that has not been seen for about 100 years. And all these are events and occurrences of the next and further future, which were programmed and will appear only by the guilt of the Earth humans.
And of course, all those responsible for it will repudiate the guilt for it far away, and claim that everything has completely natural and nature-caused origins.
This will unfortunately be as it has been since time immemorial.
When will the storms be in China, and when the drought in Russia?
The major storms and the drought will begin catastrophically in a few days. In Russia, however, the earth will no longer calm down, because the earthquakes will not end there either. A major earthquake will soon occur again in Georgia.
Unfortunately, nothing can be changed. But something different. Would it not be possible that you could take me with you on a trip to Simyase and Asket?
You take away my surprise, which I actually wanted to postpone until the end of our conversation, because I should order something very special from my daughter.
So I heard right after all?
So, I do not understand your words.
I heard your thoughts, my friend. While you were talking about thunderstorms and drought, you thought that Simyase made the suggestion to you and asked you to take me sometime this year to the Dal universe and to her with your spaceship, because she wants to see me and asks for me. You gave free rein to your thoughts and did not control them, my friend.
Unfortunately, my surprise failed as a result. I was so excited in joy at this surprise for you that I actually lost control over my thoughts. Which of course could not remain hidden from you, since you have a pronounced ability to hear human beings' thoughts literally.
I do not usually do that, because I block myself against it. Because I do not always want to know what is being thought about me, for example. Unfortunately, the blockade does not always help. Because if my counterparts think too emotionally, or simply too intensively, then I literally take up their thoughts, which has not been a secret for a long time, not even with our group members.
That is of correctness, as Quetzal would now answer. But now to my daughter's request to bring you to her. It shall happen as she and you wish. But I will have to determine the time for it first. Maybe Quetzal will do this trip with you because he wants to see you as well as my daughter Simyase. Until then, however, it may be possible for the two of you to travel with our latest achievement and get to my daughter, with our latest transport system. With a transmitter that has made it possible for us to reach any and even the farthest point in no decompression time if there is a counter equipment there, so a transmitter receiving station. Through different relay stations, we can reach any point in the universe. However, these relay stations are necessary because we do not yet have transmitters with unlimited range. Nevertheless, we do not need any time to get from one point to another, except for the time it takes to get from the receiving transmitter to the radiating transmitter and to program the new coordinates of the new target. But even this programming by station will soon be a thing of the past, and so will the switching from one transmitter to another, because soon it will be possible to program the final destination at the output transmitter, and the individual relay stations will automatically carry out the next programming together with the onward transmission, so that no more time is required for this either. Over the next 3 years, our scientists should be able to put into operation a transmitter apparatus that no longer requires relay stations, but has an unlimited range, and is designed in such a manner that the transmitter can radiate a receiving transmitter to any and even the farthest target in the universe, where it materializes by a certain sequence of impulses and in which all goods and materials, forms of life, etc., radiated to it materialize. At present, however, a chain of relay stations is being created, which itself extends into the Dal universe, making it possible to reach the Dal universe from Era with a delay of only 14 minutes. With this technique, you would be with my daughter Sim-Ya say in less than 25 minutes, if we add the flight time from Earth to Era. This would also allow you to get to my daughter Sim-Ya say in the sister universe in only half a day. Spend a few hours with her and ask it, and then be home early again, that you would not have to accept any loss of work.
Man, Ptah, that would be something. When is this transmitter chain going to start?
During the month of September, everything should be ready.
Until then, I gladly wait.
With the same words, so to speak, Quetzal declared to me his patience to wait.
Like the father, like the son, or the apple does not fall far from the tree.
You speak of previous millennia, I understand. Maybe you are right, even if it is hard to assume that since then such things have survived in such a strong manner that they are taken in this form from the memory banks to such an extent.
It was meant to be more amusing. Do not take everything so seriously, my friend.
I should have known that.
Also, fun has to be sometimes. You cannot always take everything so fatally seriously.
That is right. But now listen to what I have to say about the future, although perhaps I will not be very precise in the chronological order. As you know, towards the end of last month, Bangladesh was hit by the worst storms, which triggered masses of devastating catastrophes and which have not yet come to an end at the present time. This will not change very soon because for several weeks to come, these storms will continue to bring floods, destruction, and death to the country and the human beings. So this is not just a short-term storm disaster, but a long-lasting one as it will be in China. Also, the volcanoes Pinatubo of the Philippines and Unzendake in Japan will not cause any short-term catastrophes with their eruptions, but will spread destruction, fear, and terror for a long time, whereby it is to be feared that the volcanoes could explode. For a very long time, at any rate, they will no longer come to rest. Until further notice, they will remain active and cause much damage and devastation, claim human lives, and disturb the Earth's climate. Heavy storms will also characterize the rest of the world. In Romania and the Maldives, for example, torrential rains will cause devastation and destruction around the beginning of July, which will be a particularly hard month for such events. Around the 10th of July, Romania will be the starting point of an earthquake whose epicenter will be near the city of Temesvar. This earthquake will also shake Yugoslavia with a magnitude of 5.5 on the Richter scale. Around the time of the 7th to 10th of July, Lima is hit by an unusually strong cold wave, to which a large number of human beings will fall victim due to frostbite. California in the USA will not be spared from natural disasters either, because around the 29th of June, this part of America will be shaken by an earthquake, which will have a magnitude of 6 on the Richter scale and its epicenter in the Sierra Madre, causing considerable destruction. Your fatherland, Switzerland, will not be spared either, for severe storms. Hailstorms and enormous masses of water will cause great damage, with the cantons of Neuchâtel, Bern, and Zurich being the first to be affected, especially from the 5th to the 9th of July. Also in the autumn time, enormous storm damage will occur, of which I will report later. In the first days of June, Severe storms and thunderstorms, floods and landslides will threaten Sri Lanka, but also a huge tidal wave, with which the thunderstorms will cause a lot of damage. In the middle of July, the whole of Europe will not be spared from such storms either, after the Caspian Sea will be flooded by violent storms between the 2nd and 8th of July, so that many villages will be flooded. At the beginning of July, Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan will also be devastated by devastating storms, preceded by heat waves in June, which will particularly affect the areas in and around Rajasthan, while heavy rains will follow in the south, which will of course claim many lives again. In mid-June, the east of the United States of America will also be hit by a heat wave, while at the turn of the month, June-July, there will be a greater number of deaths due to severe storms and flooding. At present, large and devastating storms are also taking place in Turkey, which are associated with floods and enormous damage. The earthquake that occurred on the 14th to the 15th of May in Chile was also only the beginning of further bad events for this country. Because thunderstorms, landslides, floods, and devastation of all kinds will keep Chile in suspense far beyond the middle of the year. But also it just does not work anymore, I need to talk about it. The whole event annoys me, and I cannot understand it in any wise. I am talking about...
You are upset, my friend. You interrupt yourself in the middle of your remarks and talk about things that you have only ever discussed with me in private, so to speak.
In fact, I am upset, for it is incomprehensible to me that a man, despite the knowledge given to him, can play so recklessly and without discernment with his present and many future lives, in addition to his own destiny, to which he is committed, and also with the fulfillment of was performed. But now for this matter I am of course available for further information, if this should be necessary. But with that, I have now freed myself from my irritation, and have spoken of the necessary things which had to be said in this matter. So I can now actually continue in my explanations, if you do not have still another urgent question in addition.
I did not, but I have something else, if you want to give me an answer to that.
If it is so important, just ask.
It is not that important that I cannot wait a little longer.
Then I think it would be better if I first knew what I was.
Of course. Do you still have much to explain?
Of course, it will be a long time before I have explained everything that needs to be explained.
Then I would really prefer it if you would start with your explanations, my friend.
Well then, I will continue to follow my explanations, where I interrupted myself in excitement. I had stopped at the many catastrophes, which will also appear this year everywhere on Earth, both thunderstorms, volcanic eruptions, and epidemics, as well as earthquakes, floods, enormous forest fires, landslides, and rock slides, from which also Switzerland is not spared, as has already been proved, and which will not yet be the end, as this is already predicted by the prophecies. Cholera, too, is spreading even further across the countries of the world, with Africa being the next event to make a name for itself in this regard, especially the state of Niger in the Sahel. Catastrophic, hygienically precarious conditions and circumstances are to blame for this epidemic, whereby the human beings themselves are to blame for these poor conditions. Most of the many violent storms and destruction of all kinds caused by nature's rebellion, as for example in China and Bangladesh, as well as most of the other climate changes and storms of all kinds appearing around the world, and also all the earthquakes, etc., are, for the most part, the debt burden of the terrestrial human being, as I already mentioned. Most present and future catastrophes of all kinds, and also all other nature-related degenerations, are attributable, for the most part, to the direct or indirect fault of the Earth humans. such as environmental pollution of all kinds, oil fires as in Kuwait, atomic bomb tests, dam construction, nuclear power plants, poison spraying and poison burning as well as poison dumping into the seas, oil catastrophes on the seas due to oil ship fractures, etc., and waste oil discharges into the waters, etc., forest clearings and other forest offenses, as in the rainforests, which are important oxygen producers and climate regulators for the Earth. Poison gas emissions by unnecessary gasoline and diesel oil consumption for unnecessary journeys with vehicles requiring such fuel, etc., like cars, motorcycles, trucks, airplanes, and other vehicles and machines, etc., stand thereby on the front line of that list of negative terrestrial human-made works, which slowly destroy, however, with deadly certainty, the Earth and all lives existing on it. The most serious of these are destructive vehicle uses, which are undertaken for the sake of sheer comfort or for purely prestige reasons for sporting and image, as well as money-seeking reasons, such as motorcycle, car and ship races, etc., or for unnecessary training flights by the air forces. Sport flying also belongs to this category, if it is not gliding or necessary emergency flights. In the private sector, 2. This is a sham. Especially in transport, where it causes a great deal of environmental damage and slowly destroys the Earth's climate and the ozone layer by transporting all goods only in vehicles that are dependent on petrol and diesel oil, such as cars, motorcycles, ships, airplanes and trucks and tractors, etc., although everything could be transported more safely and, above all, without destroying the climate by rail. Although electrical energy may only be produced by solar, wind and hydroelectric power stations, because nuclear, coal, wood, or oil power stations promote environmental pollution and destruction even more than transport vehicles powered by petrol, diesel oil, gas, or alcohol, etc. A fact which, unfortunately, is either denied or underestimated by the proponents of electrical energy. However, out of a maladjusted thinking in terms of rationalization, exactly the wrong thing is done, and thus the main freight traffic is shifted onto the streets with all kinds of environmentally destructive, poisonous vehicles. The greatest nonsense, however, is, I have to express it like this, that through unfair and erroneous claims and assumptions, environmental pollution and ozone depletion, etc., are being forcibly accelerated by the fact that on motorways and highways the speeds are imposed, with such stupid and blatant restrictions that the pollutant emissions of all gasoline and diesel oil vehicles or other fuel combustion vehicles increase to such an extent that the entire nature will soon no longer be able to bear these additional pollutants to any degree. The fact is that lower speeds of all types of combustion-powered vehicles emit heavier and denser pollutants than at high speeds. However, it should also be noted that in the speed restriction madness of those responsible, it takes much longer to travel a certain distance than it does at higher speeds due to the lower speeds. If, for example, an hourly average of 100 kilometers is reached, then the journey of a certain distance takes 1 hour. But if the speed is limited to an hourly average of 50 kilometers, then the journey for the same distance takes twice the time, that is to say, 2 hours. This fact alone should make it clear to human beings that not only is more fuel consumed, but that pollutant emissions also increase by many %. However, this is not taken into account and is even denied and falsified by those unfair technical lights that are responsible for a cleaner environment. All the more, the truth of the fact is falsified and distorted that by lower speeds heavier, more polluting and more dangerous pollutants are released in many times more massive mass, and the whole environment and the ozone layer, as well as all life, is impaired and endangered, as this is the case with higher speeds, which, in common sense, should be about 90 kilometers per hour on interurban roads and about 128 kilometers per hour on motorways. Because these speeds produce the least emissions of pollutants, even if these speeds are certainly not recommended in terms of safety. With regard to catastrophic environmental pollution, however, the smoking, poison and steam-producing industries are also to blame, as well as the Earth humans' pleasure-seeking industries, whereby the latter, in turn, is based on the wear and tear of petrol and oil, because catastrophic pollutant emissions are created by pure pleasure rides with petrol and oil vehicles, by which human beings and animals and the entire environment and the spheres surrounding the Earth are dangerously damaged. All irresponsible burdens that should actually be banned by the responsible. The many catastrophic natural events and other occurrences and happenings of all possible rigors of nature that appear with elementary force have not been normal and natural for quite some time, but they are almost without exception in the debt of the Earth human, who, out of sheer exuberance, out of greed for power and greed for profit and out of rewarding stupidity and audacity, slowly but surely not only destroys all fauna and flora as well as human life on planet Earth, but also this wonderful planet Earth itself, which floats like a lonely, precious, and wonderful jewel far away in the space surrounding it. This fact, however, is still today vehemently disputed, trivialized and denied by all those irresponsible elements of power-hungry scientists, fanatics, false seers, and rulers, so that even the truly responsible cannot react with the necessary resistance and correction and change of catastrophic conditions. Because despite seeing eyes, hearing ears, and open senses, they are deceived by the criminal, irresponsible masses to such an extent that they are not able to recognize the truth. A fact which can in no wise be dismissed with any humorous phrases, because there is really nothing ridiculous about it, as is the case, for example, with those misguided ones who still believe in the boundless nonsense of the circles and figures in the cornfields of Stonehenge in England and around the world, who even worship them and glorify them as works of extraterrestrial or secret occult earthly forces, etc. Although all in all everything is only the work of earthly human charlatans, business makers and jokers, as well as of evil swindlers, as you could see yourself when you saw with your own eyes the machinations for the emergence of such circles and figures in cornfields and meadows, in Stonehenge and in other places of the earth with Quetzal's help. In this respect, another spectacular series of such crop circles and cornfield figures is now in the offing, this time in northern Germany, which will make a name for themselves all over the world and attract misguided believers, fanatics, would-be experts, profiteers, ghost-seers, etc. Wildest suppositions and assertions of allegedly observed phenomena and UFOs, etc. will quickly make the rounds and attract or allow speculation in all those misguided ones who believe all the nonsense and mischief in this regard. Although these crop circles and cornfield figures appearing in northern Germany will also be nothing but a prank, which will be made in the same kind and wise as the circles and figures in Stonehenge and in other places around the globe. In the case of this imminent prank, which is already planned, the authors of the crop circles and cornfield figures will soon speak up and openly announce their prank with the hint that they could do just as well as the folks of Stonehenge and in the rest of the world. A fact that also comes true, and a work of practical jokers that will not stand back behind the deceptions of Stonehenge and the rest of the world, only that it is not a deception to be committed, as in Stonehenge and all other places on earth, but just a joke, which after the publication of the circles and figures will soon be made recognizable as a student eulogy, but after many misguided Believers, fanatics, profiteers, and wannabe scientists and wannabe connoisseurs of the subject will have exposed themselves to ridicule, which is likely to be true around the middle or end of July.
Man, you have not spoken so many words at once for a long time, but I do not want to interrupt you as long as you can continue.
I am not unaccustomed to speaking at length when it is necessary.
Fine. Then you have explained a few things again that entices me to ask you if I can ask you a question now. Maybe two?
If it has to be, but I still have a lot to say.
So, at the moment, there is another such fuss here in Europe, in reference to the so-called Bach flower therapy, which is supposed to cure all kinds of diseases and complaints. The point is that essences are produced from certain flowers, which may only be harvested in certain places in England, and which are used in tiny quantities, so to speak, as a medicine. The substances contained in the flower essences should then have certain curative effects in the form that human beings afflicted by certain ailments are cured by them, precisely by using the essences intended for this purpose. In this regard, I have now read some writings which deal with this Bach flower therapy, whereby I could not help feeling that it is more a matter of faith than a real healing therapy. Now the question whether you know anything about this funny thing, and if so, what is the truth, and what is the fiction about it?
In fact, we have been following these things, and even our most qualified scientists have been studying them. Unfortunately, however, their in-depth and profound results have turned out to be so accurate that they correspond exactly to what you call a matter of belief. Just like the pseudo-spiritual healing applied by the earthly charlatans, the whole theater is only about the fact that faith and lies and deception are hidden behind it. And if ever healings or improvements of illnesses appear, then these are spontaneous or long-worked self-healings or healings and improvements of another kind, which have no connection whatsoever with this stupid heresy of the Bach flower therapy.
Well, that is what I wanted to know. But are there newer values for the spread of AIDS in Switzerland, for example? I was asked about these recently.
The epidemic is also spreading rapidly in Switzerland, with the irresponsibility of those affected just as much to blame as the incomprehensible carelessness. But there is also irresponsibility elsewhere in the world, and not only in relation to the AIDS epidemic. For example, hundreds of young human lives are murdered in Brazil, where death squads not only shoot down adult criminals like target figures or mutilate them bestially, torture and kill them, but also many hundreds of children of all ages, even smaller children. In many cases, death squads consist of police officers and fanatical right-wing extremists who carry out deadly and radical purges, as they call these terrible acts, in their own circles. In addition, for example, the atrocities of many Japanese deep-sea fishermen appear like bagatelles when they massacre animals alive. Sharks cut away their fins while alive, which are used for soups, in order to throw the still living animals back into the sea and leave them to their miserable, agonizing, and miserable fate, whereby they have to give their lives miserably. Japan is also talking about other things in the near future, and not because of the volcano Unzendeki, of which I already reported, but because of an oil tanker with the name Tenyo Maru, which will suffer a heavy accident and lose large quantities of oil and endanger the coast and thus a lot of natural life, as it always occurs in such cases.
So, and when will that be?
According to our forecasts, this event will take place after the 20th of July.
You once told me that microwaves and aluminium particles are very dangerous to humans, which is why they should not be used for cooking, etc. Can you briefly explain the most important thing to me?
Of course. But first, I would like to point out to you that I promised to draw your attention to it at the time when the foundation stone was laid to bring about the end of the Communist Party, or simply the CPSU in Russia, and thus the approaching end of Marxism-Leninism. The days after the 29th of July, 1991 are also valid for this, whereby Mikhail Gorbachev will be the driving force and the initiator from the beginning.
And how will the CP react?
The result has already been determined. The majority of Mikhail Gorbachev's proposals will find a very positive reaction. As far as microwaves are concerned, however, I would like to briefly explain to you that they are extremely harmful to humans. Not only do they destroy the psyche of humans and animals and the life of plants in more severe cases, but they also impair, for example, the entire brain functions of humans, up to and including brain destruction, whereby cancer can also manifest itself, which is already the case with terrestrial humans. Concerning the aluminium particles, we can say, aluminium particles ingested by humans are dangerous for humans because, like other factors, they trigger the terrible Alzheimer's disease. As far as cancer is concerned, in the future, microwaves will increasingly appear as the cause because, unfortunately, microwaves are being used more and more for all sorts of purposes, more and more thoughtlessly and more irresponsibly. Cooking with microwaves destroys the vitamins and is to be specifically mentioned as a great evil, this among many other abuses. The eyesight of humans and animals is also endangered by microwaves, and in the specific case of cataracts, which can be increasingly caused by microwaves. However, various types of cancer, as already mentioned, are also caused increasingly by microwaves, although simple and non-cancer cell damage caused by microwaves is also becoming increasingly common and will cause many other evils. Microwaves often cause the fruit of pregnant women to be damaged or even destroyed and lost. Although the ignorant doctors are unable to establish the fact of its origin because they simply lack the necessary equipment, instruments, and knowledge. But that is not all, for the woman's fertility is also threatened by the waves, which easily destroy it, just as it is the case that the man is deprived of his fertility. On certain worlds known to us, it is common for men and women to be sterilized by microwaves in order to counteract an overpopulation of the planets by man.
But I have, for example, advantageously undergone a microwave treatment in order to get rid of almost unbearable pain, which I had succumbed to due to my knee arthritis.
Of course, because with rationality, microwaves can also have healing and progressive purposes and usage possibilities if they are brought to application with intellect and rationality. On Earth, these things and the concerns about microwaves are not yet so well known to humans and especially to scientists and researchers, etc., that they are able to deal fully with these powers, which is why they cause even more damage at present and in the near future than they achieve positive successes.
This cannot be changed unless you help something with impulses.
We have been trying for some time now.
Then the future does not look very precarious in this respect either, apart from the madness of the catastrophes caused by the human beings.
Of course, you may look at that in this form. But let me tell you about other things to come, if you do not have another question.
I still have something, because of the lightning that hit me in the finger. I had to go to the doctor and get injections for inflammation and pain, because everything simply did not want to improve. There was probably a short-term improvement, but the pain has not completely subsided since then. That just bothers me, because often I get really electrified when I touch something, or when I shake someone's hand. Is there anything you can do about it and repair the damage?
It will hardly be the case that more can be done about it with earthly medicine. According to your words, the doctor has done what is necessary and possible. But if you want, I could order that we repair the damage caused by an injury to the nerves in your thumb, which cannot be repaired by natural regeneration. Organic damage of this kind usually does not heal itself again.
Then I just let it go. It is not that bad that it would not be bearable. It is just annoying.
I know that you can endure a lot of pain, but if one day it becomes too much for you and you want to have the damage repaired by us, then you should not eschew telling me about it.
Okay, let us leave it at that. But I have one more question regarding the things you said about the death squad murders in Brazil. You said that hundreds of children and criminals would be murdered by those death squads, but you did not go further into what the real reasons for those murders were.
I wanted to talk about that in another context. But if you ask the question, then I will also answer it likewise. The children, hundreds of whom are murdered in Brazil by death squads, are so-called street children who live wildly on the streets and live their lives without parents through criminal and other asocial acts. Theft and robbery and many other lawless deeds of these children are not only objected to by the injured businessmen, but also by other citizens and above all by the death squads, whereby these death squads consist as a rule and mainly of police officers, together with other dark elements, who want to defend and create the right with the weapon and with murder and manslaughter. On the one hand, the death squads act at their own discretion and under their own direction in order to murder street children, while on the other hand, also businessmen and private individuals pay the death squads with bribes, which are actually blood and murder money, so that they torture, massacre, or otherwise bestially kill the thieving and asocial street children just as they do adult criminals and other asocial ones. This, however, is not yet the full extent of the whole horror, for it goes much further. The bodies of murdered children and adults are often used as organ donors, as is the case with the executions in China, although the actual events in Brazil are even more gruesome. There, not only are the murdered used as organ donors, but criminal elements and antisocial as well as stolen children are even held and well fed in certain places in order to kill them later and rob them of their organs, which are sold dearly, whereby these bad places are similarly arranged as breeding institutions for animals.
Horrible. Can you not do anything about it?
You know that we must not interfere in any earthly matters. The only thing we can do is to set off decisive impulses that are received by responsible Earth humans and then begin to fight against the horror.
Of course.
Unfortunately, we are not allowed to do more, although we would have enough possibilities to bring such inhuman activity to an abrupt end.
But unfortunately, it cannot be, I know. And you have already told me enough of the reasons for this, which I have to accept. But there is no point in talking more about it, which is why I have one more question about things I have been asked over and over again, like the little grays in America. As crazy Americans claim and stir up an immense propaganda for it, the American government should maintain contacts to these little grays, and even allow them to carry out inhuman experiments on terrestrial humans, in addition to gruesome animal experiments, etc. There should even be an exchange program between these little grays and the Americans should profit from the technology of the little twits, from which I have not yet discovered an iota. Also, an alleged former secret agent of the CIA with the pseudonym Falcon should play a certain role, as well as the constellation Reticuli, or what that should be called.
I have told you several times before that this whole puffed-up story and all the trimmings are nothing more than a crazy and deceptive fantasy of power-hungry elements that make many kinds of profit out of it, even including government agencies and intelligence services. Similarly, or even remotely similar, or on the same scale, are countless other identical or similar stories and allegations concerning alleged contact with humans or other beings from foreign worlds, whereby I would like to point out another time that at the present time, You are the only human being on Earth who has actual contact with extraterrestrial life forms, both in telepathic and physical form. All other claims made by any human being on Earth in this regard are either pure invention, hallucinogenic, insane, delusional, conscious or pathologically fraudulent, fanatically religious or otherwise unreal.
You have explained this so often, but the lunatics and the skeptics on the Earth simply do not allow themselves to be taught. But what about, for example, the machinations of the South American groups, who own the appropriate aircraft and like to pretend to be extraterrestrials?
That is a story in itself, because these power-hungry lunatics have not stopped their activities by a tiny bit yet. On the other hand, it has to be said that it appears again and again, but very rarely, that human life forms land on Earth and are seen and observed unintentionally or by carelessness of terrestrial inhabitants. This, however, usually has no further consequences than that both sides become terrified and the visitors set off again as quickly as possible without making contact.
This is already known, because you have talked about it several times. But if you allow it, then I would have some more questions, even if I keep you from your future executions.
As you like, then I will explain the future events later. So ask about the things that concern you.
Good, thank you. Ah, yes, of course. Next I wanted to ask you a question, which in turn refers to a question that was put to me. This is a matter of the last World War, if you have knowledge about it and can give me information.
I have very extensive knowledge of both the First and Second World Wars on the Earth. There is probably no section in this respect to which I could not give you exhaustive information regarding any questions.
Thank you. Then I would like to ask you the following question. How many human beings were murdered by the Nazi regime in view of the fact that they were of Jewish faith or otherwise Jewish? In short, the question is actually, how many Jews and Jewish allies were murdered by the Nazi Gentiles, etc.? In this regard, it was explained to me that the figures given by Jewish organizations did not correspond to the truth, that it was indeed much fewer Jews who were killed by the Nazi regime than is claimed. This question and explanation came to me from the American side.
This explanation is also correct. Truthfully, not 6 to 8 million Jews were murdered, but only 4.07 million of them, if I may speak of only with regard to murdered human lives. The deceitful figure of 6 to 8 million Jewish deaths is a pure and maliciously purposeful invention, through which things were achieved with the help of the world so that an Israelite state could be established that could not have been accomplished otherwise. The lying assertion that more than 6 or 8 million Jewish believers have been murdered by the Nazi regime is only a purpose and profit-related work of the human beings, who are still at work today, who terrorize the world with discord and murder, mostly by the Secret Service minions, who do not want constant peace, but only more power and more land and so on. What is fact, however, with regard to murders in the Third Reich by the Nazi regime, is that not only Jewish believers in the number of 4.07 million, but also Jewish friends, Jewish helpers and other Jews were murdered by gassing, shooting, drowning, burning, killing, hanging, starvation and medical experiments, etc. But also criminals of all kinds were killed in the same process, as well as antisocial ones of all kinds, alcoholics, drug addicts, lunatics, confused ones, mentally ill ones and mongoloids as well as terminally ill ones, etc., etc. Gypsies such as Sinti and Roma members were also abducted, put in concentration camps and murdered, along with many others who were not sympathetic to the Nazi regime, or who violated its insane rules or simply did not fit into its concept. In this way, in addition to the actual believers in Judaism, there were their further 3.73 million humans who were very often cruelly handed over to death by the Nazi regime. Thus, in the end, there were a total of 7.8 million human beings who were murdered by racist and cleansing action machinations of the Nazis, which corresponds to about 1/6 of the total number of all war victims of the Second World War.
It was horrible, but it happened anyway. But further, because I have other questions. The following was further asked. Why joggers and toddlers die suddenly for no apparent reason, as it happens again and again here on Earth?
Often a false doctrine regarding child care is to blame for this, namely, among other things, mainly the erroneous view of the treatment of small children that these should be placed on the stomach after a meal or to sleep, because this allegedly reduces the danger of suffocation in the event of sudden burping or vomiting, etc. However, if infants are placed on their stomachs, this is extremely dangerous because the heart, lungs, and all other organs are affected in their function by carbon dioxide, which is inhaled when they lie on their stomachs. But this is extremely life-threatening, especially for small children, and often ends with a sudden death, which in ignorance of the cause is then simply called sudden infant death by the terrestrial human being. Not only for small children. However, lying on the belly can be life-threatening under certain circumstances. For larger children and adults, can also be life-threatening if they lie on the belly inhaling carbon dioxide. However, a full stomach can lead to death when jogging, which is a malignant evil of unhealthiness for humans anyway, as is the case with bathing or strenuous sports of any kind. Injections and doping of all kinds can also cause death, as can drugs of all kinds. When human beings lie on their stomachs after they have been administered or taken, or engage in strenuous sports, drink alcohol, take a bath, etc. In fact, these things cannot be done for fun, as this must not be the case after vaccinations of any kind, whereby precisely this aspect is still very ignorant because of earthly medicine and makes many mistakes, because many vaccines are not only pathogenic in another form, but often also have deadly effects, although we have been working in this respect for quite some time with appropriate impulses to draw the attention of earthly medical scientists and so forth to them. Still, many vaccines of the terrestrial humans are very inadequate and are able to bring apart from heaviest shocks and cramps also all kinds of allergies and even death. Why vaccinations should be made in each case really only according to urgent need. Only those vaccinations may be carried out without hesitation which demonstrably do not cause any harm or only cause moderate and negligible harm. However, it is often the case, for example with rubella, whooping cough, and diphtheria, that vaccinations cause serious illnesses and often fatal consequences, as well as permanent damage that cannot be repaired. This is even the case with the very important tetanus vaccination, which is why it should be handled with extreme caution.
I know you told me this in confidence on the Great Journey 15 years ago.
At that time, I told you that it would probably be appropriate for Earth humans to finally become more responsible, and not to simply throw medicines,
etc. onto the market in order to make a profit before 100% security for their application was given. I also said at the time that the human being had to become much less sniveling and learn to endure some pain, and heal themselves from certain diseases in order to require less medical help from chemistry, and to keep their body, psyche, and consciousness healthier.
I still remember this very well.
Beautiful. May I ask you a few more questions?
If it has to be.
Good. You know that I do not think much of Erich von Däniken's writing. Especially not because I know from you that in his writing only 4:4, of his assertions come close to the truth, which is admittedly very much. But I do not like his self-opinionated posturing and megalomania, which does not make him sympathetic to me. The fact that he accuses me of lying and cheating leaves me actually cold, because to want to be resentful or instructive to megalomaniacs and autocrats is not to be because they are too small in their consciousness and mind to be able to grasp and evaluate complaints or teachings. But why I raise this issue is actually because I was asked for my opinion regarding the person and value of the writings of John of Butler. Can you give me a comprehensive or exhaustive answer in this regard, if you know this name at all?
Of course, I can both give you information and answer your question, and I know the name and personality of Johannes von Butler. With regard to his personality, it must be said that it far exceeds that of the negative traits of Erich von Däniken, for, in addition to megalomania, pseudoscientificness, and autocracy, he also displays arrogance and many other negative aspects. The value of his books is even less than that of Erich von Däniken, because overall they do not even reach a truth content of 0.6%, if purely scientifically founded material is ignored, although I speak only of effective material of effective scientists, of which all pseudoscientists are excluded, who call themselves scientists of ufology or parapsychology and such nonsense. Johannes von Butler himself has written a total of 18 books to date, the value of which, however, must by and large be rated less than the well-known trash literature of crime, Western, adventure, future, and romance novels. Butler does not even deserve the title of pseudoscientist, as Däniken can still concede, because his claims, which are close to nonsense, are based either on the wildest fantasy or on the pseudoscientific results of others.
This is how I imagined it to be. But how long will it be before he reveals all his stupidity in public? That will probably be a long time coming.
You should not be so sure about that, because as a believing advocate and fantasist of the crop circle figures as the work of extraterrestrials and as PSI forces of the Earth, etc., he will already suffer a defeat in the month of September, but this will not stop him from his absurd and morbidly stupid and misleading actions of spreading his fantasy, and unfortunately will not change much among the believers of all PSI fantasies. Sectarianism, lies, and deception around extraterrestrial life forms, spirits and demons, and sectarian machinations.
Why of all things in September?
The same thing will happen in England as in northern Germany. The fraud and deception with the crop circles will be revealed.
There is no such thing. Really?
It will happen as much as many other things related to delusion, fraud, deception, and sectarianism. Although the fraudulent Marian devotee Pino in Giubiasco in the canton of Ticino is still able to continue his fraudulent enterprise for some time to come and fool human beings on the Scarpap Alp, this fraud will come to an end, as will the alleged Marian miracle in the St. Petersburg. St. Mary's Church in Addis Ababa and Bassam Asaf's trick of pouring oil into his hands and inventing alleged messages of salvation for his employer in his house chapel. However, these are only 3 examples of many that will happen in the near future, and whose fraud and deception will be seen through and discovered. Also, in the field of the alleged contacts with extraterrestrials, and in reference to all kinds of machinations of channelers and summoners and the like, more discoveries of swindles and deception will take place, because the time of relevant realizations comes closer and closer, of which already the first contractions are noticeable.
Then slowly and finally the time comes when the swindlers and cheaters, as well as the liars, slanderers, and pseudoscientists slowly lose their power and are recognized.
Unfortunately, this will not be that fast, but the beginning has already begun, even if the way to the final goal is still long. The innumerable liars, swindlers and deceivers and the pseudoscientists in matters of ufology, alleged contacts, channeling, etc., and the believers of these gloomy and slanderous and misleading machinations, however, are all recognized and denounced. No matter whether it is about the falsehoods of the alleged Falcon of the American Secret Service or about other lying stories and machinations of little grays and other nonsense.
Well, that should be enough on this subject. Could you perhaps tell me something else? Perhaps what the summer in Switzerland will be like this year. How the AIDS situation in Switzerland is starting. Why the dinosaurs are really extinct. Why Judas Iscariot is still regarded worldwide as a traitor to Emmanuel, although you actually said that Judas would be redeemed around the year 1976.
Those are 3 questions. My friend, but good. I will answer your last question first. With the first spreading of the Talmud Emmanuel by you, the redemption of Judas Iscariot has already begun, worldwide. It will not fail, however, that other human beings will also be seized by this fact, whereby the truth that Judas Iscariot was not the traitor, but another, namely a Pharisee's son with the similar name Judah I Harriet, will also be spread elsewhere. As far as AIDS in Switzerland is concerned, I unfortunately have to explain that your home is the part of the world where, in terms of population percentages, most AIDS cases occur worldwide. The official government censuses and statistics do not correspond to reality because the number of unreported HIV positives in Switzerland is much higher than in any other country in the world. If I have to answer your question about the dinosaur death, I must point out that this question was already answered about 15 years ago by my daughter Sim-Ya Se, who explained to you that 50% of all terrestrial life forms died out due to a worldwide climate change, which brought with it a tremendous cold. In addition to dinosaurs, climate change has also exterminated many other animal species, and of course, countless species of flora. The reason for the worldwide climate change was found at that time in 2 enormous natural events. So on the one hand, in the fact that several gigantic meteorites crashed on the Earth, which had wandered for many millennia far away from the asteroid track of the asteroid belt through space, whereby they distanced themselves more and more from the actual asteroid belt, and finally found the track to Earth, and their impact plunged it into a gigantic catastrophe and climate change. The Earth was shaken to its foundations by the tremendous impact, which revealed the second natural event, the fact that in many places the earth and the seabed were ruptured and opened the way to the surface for the magma bubbling inside the earth. New volcanoes erupted from the earth and from the waters, while old volcanoes began to live again, not to mention active fire mountains that suddenly spewed out their lava in wild force. It seemed as if the earth was going to end, as around the world hundreds of volcanoes spewed their glowing masses of earth and rock and smoke, sulfur fumes and ash high into the sky with unprecedented force, darkening the skies within a few weeks, and becoming one with the gigantic dust cloud that had been created by the meteorite impact and which had already eclipsed the sun to a large extent. By the many hundreds of volcanoes and earth chimneys raging with primeval force and by the dirt, soot and dust particles hurled out, a world-encompassing dense and opaque veil developed, which suffocated and destroyed 50% of all life among itself.
And when was that approximately?
It took place roughly at the turn of the Cretaceous-Tertiary period.
Does this not correspond to the time of 60 million years ago?
About 5 million years later, about 65 million years ago. But why did you direct these questions to me? Surely you should know the answers. But massive meteorite impacts also took place 80, 120, 175, 210, and about 250, 340, and about 420 million years ago, etc., whereby many forms of life died out or were greatly reduced.
They are to me, too. The questions were addressed to me elsewhere with the request that I should present them to you and have you answer them.
Your old game that I was not supposed to fall for anymore. On the other hand, these are questions I can answer without hesitation. However, it should and must not become a habit again that questions are addressed to us that are not exclusively worked out by you. We cannot go back to answering questions from anyone.
It should not come to that. Excuse me.
It does not require your apology.
Beautiful, thank you. Well, it is actually a bit stupid, but how do you see my name? Sim Yase once said that I should be careful not to be called Billy anymore. But it was not easy to do that, which is why I am still called that name. On the other hand, this name was already coined 13,500 years ago, and even recorded in writing, whereby it is also written that I will carry this name in the modern times, thus in the present time also. So what is all this about?
At that time, my daughter feared for your life. Because somehow, and for reasons that were still incomprehensible to us, the name was burdened with threatening mischief over your head, which presumably could also lead to the assassination attempts on your life. A fact that is still valid and will probably never be resolved. But your name, Billy, together with all your other names, also has something positive in it. Because if you put the first letters of all your names together, so the first letters of the names Billy Edward Albert Meier, but only in this order, then the English word Billy Edward Albert Meier, which means ray, results from it. A ray in darkness, however, as such one can very well regard you when one sees you and your work as a ray of light, piercing through the darkness in the terrible dark ignorance of the Earth humans.
You therefore speak like a poetologist.
If you say so.
Of course. There is something I cannot get out of my mind. You said earlier that in England, too, the swindle with the cornfield circles is finally being uncovered. Does that also apply to all other similar machinations around the world? And is the uncovering of the worldwide giant swindle and this fraud final?
My speech was only of the fact that in England the same will happen concerning the cornfield circles as in Germany. So my words mean that some persons in England will be as active as in northern Germany with regard to the circles in the cornfields, whereby these persons will also openly and officially confess their actions in public if some pseudoscientists have made a fool of themselves who are consulted for the examination of the pictograms.
Then it is not a question of actually exposing the whole swindle, neither in England nor in the rest of the world, where the same swindles and frauds are cheerfully continuing. Nor does anything seem to be said about those who belong to that ancient Celtic cult, and who have been making such cornfield circles and other cornfield figures, which are also called pictograms, into the cornfields for magical and evocative cult rituals since time immemorial. From Quetzal I know that not only the believers of these old cults, but also followers and members of the witch faith fabricate these mysterious signs and circles into the cornfields, by trampling down the corn in various ways, or rolling it down with any kind of equipment, without bending the stalks of the corn or otherwise injuring it. The reason why cornfields of all things are used for this purpose is the fertility of the ear, and the fact that not only does life sprout from it, but also the bread is made from it, which in the cultic realm symbolizes the body and soul of human beings and the divine. These Celtic cults lead back to the time of the 8th century BC, to the Indo-Germanic peoples of the Celts, who were actually settled in Western Europe, some of whom, however, were very fond of wandering, and as a result set off on never-returning journeys throughout the world. Incredible as it may sound, they actually almost reached the remoteness of the last corners of the earth. where they mixed with various natives and continued their Celtic cults, although often in such a modified form that the origin was hardly recognizable. Yes, it was similar, or even the same with the Vikings, from whom also the original inhabitants of Switzerland descended. Yes, with regard to the Celts, it was so that they spread out especially in England and Scotland, and of course indulged in their cults there, as the emigrants in the wide world outside also did. So it was only natural that they erected and created their signs and pictograms, etc. already at that time, or simply made them. So also the signs and circles in the cornfields, as the Celtic cultists still do today in England, and also in many other places in the wide world. Only these cult pictograms, as they are called, these cornfield circles and cornfield figures of all kinds, these are not made with fraudulent and swindling intentions, like those which are made by swindlers, cheats and charlatans, in order to profit from it, or to let a certain stupid mass of humanity walk the fool's rope, like believers in sectarianism, ufology, and parapsychology, as well as other similar fools, lowly intelligent ones, fanatics and delusional ones, etc.
Actually, you have said and explained everything necessary with it. You only did not mention that with Quetzal's help you could observe not only the machinations of the swindlers and charlatans in England and elsewhere on Earth several times, but also the efforts of those who, for cultic reasons, rolled the many signs and circles into the cornfields.
I did not find it necessary to mention this, because these ritualists do not make the cornfield circles in order to deceive human beings and to make a profit, or to make fun of the stupid believers, but in order to fulfill their rites according to their faith, and thus to wish for all good and love for the totality of humankind.
You know very well the cult motives of these religions, which does not surprise me very much.
I was occupied with it for a very long time.
I know that.
Good. Then we can deal with other things again, if your mind still stands after it.
Certainly,